Good afternoon, everybody. Again, this afternoon, it seems like we've had you on quite a bit lately. Paleo-Angloism. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. I think the title of this is pretty self-explanatory. For those of you who've been living under a rock for the past 24 hours, Queen Elizabeth II, who is the longest reigning monarch in the history of the United Kingdom, and I think all of England and the history of England in general, has left us. So, as a Brit yourself, I mean, I know, of course, what your thoughts on it are, but you want to go ahead and, the lack of a better way of saying it, give your thoughts.
Well, it's a great loss for the country, really. She was. I know a lot of Americans aren't really sold on monarchy. It's kind of built into the national myth of being anti-monarchism, but you'd be very surprised at how popular Queen Elizabeth was, both internationally and nationally. She her highest disapproval rating at any point during her reign was only 13%. Like most politicians get a higher disapproval rating by the end of their first term.
So, are you saying she had a higher approval rating than Bojo?
There was never a point where it was lower than his ever.
Yeah, I know. I'm joking. But yeah, no, it was funny. I saw a meme yesterday. It was like a scale. It was like, or a graph or whatever. It was like leaders of the United Kingdom named Elizabeth, and then for like one day it went up the graph, and then it went back down to 1. So, but yeah, no. I think there's a little bit of clicking in your background.
Sorry, what did you say?
A little bit of clicking in your background, I guess, from the game you're playing.
Yeah, I apologize. It's just me moving my controller. My controller's old, so it makes a lot of noise.
Oh, that's fair. But either way, do you want to go ahead, and because I haven't really been following the news. I mean, of course, you've been following it way more than I have been, and of course, it's been. I'm guessing it's been dominating the coverage all throughout the United Kingdom. So, do you want to go ahead at least and provide like the sequence of events, more or less, for like the American audience?
Well, basically, yesterday around lunchtime, it was released to the press that the Queen, who had been in Scotland in her favourite holiday home of Balmoral, quite a famous holiday home, she was spending time there. But it was released to the press around lunchtime that apparently there was medics on the scene, and she had taken quite a bad turn medically. And it was only at that point that people start like. And here's the thing: at her age, any kind of medical issue that's serious enough that it gets released to the press is quite, it's quite serious. And then how should I put this? Basically around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, it was people started to get suspicious because the BBC, who are the nationally who are like the royally anointed official announcers of the Queen of a royal family's member's death, they changed into black tie, and then very shortly afterwards, about 3 and 4 in the afternoon, they announced that she had passed away.
Well, I mean, I feel like at this point, especially given, and I know she was in good health, but I think at least from like a realist perspective, I saw it coming within the next few years anyway. I thought maybe she'd live over to be 100 or live to be over 100. But either way, and of course, it is a time of mourning, especially for you guys in the United Kingdom. But it's not like it wasn't inevitable in any way.
Yeah,
it seems like people are treating it like it almost like people are almost seem like the way they're wording things almost seems like, oh my god, I never knew this was going to happen. But it's like, come on, I mean.
I think it's just I wouldn't put it like that. I don't think it's people being stupid so much as I just think it's she's been such a constant to British national life for the lifetimes of most people living in the UK and indeed the Commonwealth today, that a world without her just seems a bit surreal.
Sorry, could you repeat that? I think I was having some trouble with there was some trouble with my mic.
Sorry, I was just saying that it almost seemed like, I don't think it's people being stupid so much as it is that she's just been a constant of British national life for the Britain and the Commonwealth for the lifetimes of most people, that it's almost that a world without her just, it seems a bit surreal to a lot of people. I don't think when they say, "Oh, I thought she was going to live forever," I don't think they're meaning that in the literal sense. I just think that it means that she's been such a constant in people's lives that a world without her just seems a bit unnatural.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you and I were talking about this a little bit this morning about how generally after a spouse dies and they're really old, then they're not long to follow after.
Yeah, generally
with both sets of great grandparents. So
yeah, generally if a couple loves each other very much, when they have that kind of bond, when one dies, the grief can't, like, people tend to have underestimate the effects emotions can have on physical health, but like grief can, especially in old people, can really deteriorate your physical well-being.
Yeah, and I think she was ready, like just on a personal level. I mean, because she was in pretty good health the day before she was appointing or officially appointing, or not appointing. What's the word? Inaugurating.
She had her first week. She had her first of what was supposed to be weekly meetings with
Prime Minister Truss. Yeah,
with newly appointed Prime Minister Truss.
Okay.
I wouldn't say newly elected, because the process of picking a new party leader isn't necessarily democratic.
No. I mean, that's one of the biggest differences between the parliamentary system and the American Republican system.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Our newly appointed prime minister is. She basically had her first of what was supposed to be weekly meetings with her, and then within a couple of days she passed. And she did seem frail in the photo that was taken of her and Liz Truss, but she seemed to be healthy. Like, she just looked like an old woman. But then she just looked like an old woman who, like, she looked healthy for being the age she was. She looked like a woman in her late 70s, early 80s, not a woman in her late 90s.
What was it? David Icke's theory about why she looks so good is because she's like a lizard or something.
Here's the thing. I will champion most conspiracy theorists. Like, I'll champion Alex Jones. Like, I'm all for a good conspiracy about global power and and like backroom dealings and demon worship among the elite and stuff like that. I'm all for that sort of shit. Even if I don't believe in all of it, I'm more than happy for it to be spoken. But David Icke is just another level of wacky.
So I found out that, like, all this time, and it makes so much sense, but when he says lizard people, apparently, at least this is what I've read, it's just code word for the Jews.
Icke, I don't think so. I think you're thinking of David Irving.
Well, I know David Irving is David Icke, I think, because it had to do with lizard people. I mean, maybe it was just somebody's like theory. Maybe David Icke is just insane. But
I do think David Icke. I don't think David Icke is an anti-Semite. I just think he's insane.
That's fair. I still don't think he's as quote unquote lovable as Alex Jones, though, because Alex Jones is just a whole nother level of entertaining.
Oh, that's what I mean. Alex Jones's theories like he might say like stuff like "oh, pot-bellied goblins" and stuff like that, and he might make a lot of loud noise, but a lot of that is literally just like, if you actually listen to what you're saying, a lot of that is just him being hyperbolic and metaphorical. Like he's describing he's describing someone he doesn't like as a pot-bellied goblin. It's not him saying they're literally pot-bellied goblins. It's an insult. It's really what he's going for there. But it's an insult more than anything, and the meat of the conspiracies that he comes up with have been proven more correct than incorrect at this point.
Yeah, it's kind of that's pretty much the common consensus against, at least about people who like neutrally examine things that he's saying. Like I know people who aren't hardcore like Alex Jones fans or anything, but we'll like watch him to see what he's saying, and just he words things in such a way that sound crazy, but and it doesn't really work to his benefit. But then again, I don't even know if he really wants to be taken serious, because isn't he basically a performance actor?
It's not. I'm not sure he's a performance actor so much as he's just a very easily exacerbated person. I think the one thing that makes people say he's a performance actor is the fact that during what's the school shooting that he made a conspiracy about?
Sandy Hook, I think.
During the Sandy Hook trial, he basically the defense that he was going for was that he was what the defense had basically decided to say that he was a performance artist. It's kind of a way of like saying that like what he didn't really mean what he was saying, and he went along with it at first, but very quickly he changed his tune when he kind of got the feeling that people were no longer taking him seriously. Because more than anything, I think Alex Jones just wants to be taken seriously.
I guess maybe he just can't get away from it. Like the fact that people take him a certain way.
Yeah, he got the long and short of it is basically that he basically got like, I think during the trial he like later on he basically just said, no, like Alex Jones is just me. Alex Jones is all me. I'm like, Alex Jones is who I really am. Like Alex Jones, the guy on Alex Jones, the guy that you see on screen is really me. And you have to remember a lot of the stuff that comes out against him also comes out from his ex-wife, who is very vindictive against him. There's a lot of like skepticism about how truthful a lot of what she says is, considering that despite her trying to take custody of his children away from him, he actually has a very good relationship with his sons.
Rex Jones follows me on Twitter.
Yeah, he actually has a very good relationship with his children. So,
yeah. And he's also self-deprecating, and I can respect that.
Well, yeah, like, what's the famous thing he said on Alex Jones? I'm kind of retarded.
Yeah, I laughed my ass off when I saw that.
Yeah, he basically just says, "Look, I'm kind of retarded." So he's basically just kind of making that he says things a certain way, and he gets angry very easily, but he's not, he does mean what he says, and he's not just talking out of his arse. And I think a lot more people are starting to realize that, like, even if people are just memeing, like when people kind of the kind of the Alex Jones was right jar meme, like, or the when are we going to give Alex Jones his apology meme?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah, I've seen those.
Yeah.
But back to the topic at hand. And this is especially, at least from what I have observed in the American sense. Now, I will say, disclaimer, I don't really understand a lot of the American obsession with the royal family. You see it among especially like middle-class, middle-aged women and like wine moms and stuff, and a lot of boomers. And it's like, okay, that's fine. If that's their interest, whatever. I guess it's better than being interested in like the Kardashians. by a long shot. But I mean, part of it I just don't understand from an American perspective. Yet at the same time, you also have a lot of people, even in sort of like libertarian circles, which I float in. Like, for instance, I'm a member of the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus. I'm not a registered libertarian, but I'm a card-carrying member of the Mises Caucus. And a lot of the people in that, especially like high-profile members, are basically saying, "Oh yeah, another tyrant's dead," like blah 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 blah. And it's like, I mean, you're calling like, I just don't understand. It's like almost as if they don't understand the idea that like that it is a constitutional monarchy. And that the Queen has never held the kind of power that Parliament has, and it just confuses me. And then you also see a lot of people being downright disrespectful. And right now on Twitter, what is trending is hashtag abolish the monarchy. It's like, come on, at least okay. It's if you believe that, whatever, but like it's too soon.
Well, here's the thing: a lot of it is driven by. For example, you'll know if you look at my Twitter feed, you'll notice a lot of very anti-Irish Twitter posts right now, and that's because Irish Twitter has, and because Irish Twitter is particularly leftist, they have come out in droves to be very spiteful, and this has led to a very negative reaction.
So wait, are the Irish, are they even actually leftist, or are they just poising themselves as that because they are fundamentally anti-British?
No, the leftist. They're anti-British, or rather anti-English. Like, they should be anti-British, but they're only anti-English because of revisionist history.
So maybe leftists then on economics, but I mean culturally, I mean they've always been very conservative. I mean, they're all papists.
No, they're culturally conservative in the sense that they're religious, but like in the past 30 years, they've become very leftist. Like, they're for open borders, they're multicultural, they're very corporatist in that they've effectively become a tax haven.
I'm fine about that. I'm fine with the tax haven part personally.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is they're not doing it out of like some kind of like principled libertarian stance. They're doing it because it ingratiates them with the global establishment. Ireland has effectively become establishment city, and the only nationalist thing, and their nationalism is it's a very their nationalism a lot like a lot of formerly colonized countries. They have this kind of like warped left-wing nationalism that is not defined by the virtues of their nation, but defined by hatred for their former, I guess you could say, their former colonizer. And it's and I won't lie, it's a false nationalism, because then they're only nationalists in the respect that they hate someone else. They're not actually trying to defend their heritage and culture in any way that actually matters. They're basically saying, "Oh, we would happily sell out our heritage and culture, just not to the English."
Yeah, I mean, it is. I think, what is it? Goodness with fists, kind of. The Irish are literally driven by butthurt and nothing else. And I have nothing against the Irish. I like Ireland, from a cultural perspective. And though my family's more Scottish than they are Irish, we do have some Irish ancestry, more so Brittany, but still. But either way, just the whole abolish the monarchy thing, I feel like that hashtag, it looks like it's mostly among Americans who do not really actually grasp how important it is to the United Kingdom as a concept. Like, of course, you see, you'd expect that, at least in America, you have the left who are definitely more anti-hierarchy. But isn't it true that in the United Kingdom, even like the far left, like the most hardcore of the Labour Party, even though, of course, they are still for democracy, they're still for the institution of the monarchy from a cultural perspective.
Put it
Like somebody like fucking Jeremy Corbyn.
Put it this way, like basically you cannot survive being a politician in this country and remain anti-monarchy. Being anti-monarchy and being involved in politics is a realm pretty much exclusively inhabited by university students.
Okay, that makes sense.
Like Liz Truss, she went back when she was a Liberal Democrat and not a Conservative. She was back in the 90s. She was calling for the abolition of the monarchy. She's not doing that now. Yeah, there's videos of her during a Liberal Democrat conference calling for the abolition of the monarchy.
That's crazy because the Lib Dems, at least in the greater scheme of things, aren't even particularly like left wing. I mean, at least in the realm of British politics, where like in terms of your Overton window, they'd be considered like dead center.
Well, considering that the Liberal Democrats are considering the Liberal Democrats have basically slowly but surely lost their identity and effectively become Labour light, it's not really that concerning. It's not really that surprising because once upon a time, the Liberal Democrats were a coalition of the Social Democrats and the Liberal Party. But this was in a time when the Liberal Party was slowly fading from view, while the Social Democrat Party was in the ascendancy. And so the Liberal Democrats, in the years following the merger, mainly took on the culture of the Social Democrats rather than the Liberals. And so the Social Democrats were very anti-monarchy.
Okay. So did I'm guessing a lot of the new Labor type people ended up jumping ship after Corbyn took over and ended up joining the Lib Dems?
I would say the voters, yeah, but there is still a strong new Labour faction in the Labour Party, and it's actually largely thanks to them that Corbyn was done away with. And this is why I'm saying this is why Keir Starmer, I describe him as kind of like sort of a indecisive social democrat, because he's kind of caught between a progressive neoliberal faction and a progressive socialist faction.
Kind of like someone like Kamala Harris in the U.S., I guess, would probably be maybe a good way to.
Yeah, it would probably be pretty analogous, though keeping in mind that our conservative party is more analogous to your Democrats than Republicans. So
like Boris would probably be to the left of Biden, or at least right where he is.
I would say Boris and Biden are pretty much on par with one another.
Yeah.
Like I would say Nigel Farage, who is considered like bordering on far right here, if not actually far right here, is probably our only real example of a Trump type person.
I wouldn't even say Trump. I'd say he's closer to someone like Rand Paul.
Well, yeah,
he's way more libertarian than Trump, lowercase L, whereas Donald Trump is more of like a right wing populist.
Well, economically, I would say he's probably slightly to the left of Rand Paul, because he's whereas Rand Paul I would describe as more concretely libertarian, albeit paleo-libertarian.
I wouldn't even call Rand Paul like paleo-libertarian. I wouldn't even call Ron Paul necessarily a paleo-libertarian, but I mean, they definitely have characteristics of that. But I'd say Rand Paul is definitely, at least over the years, has become far more establishment than Ron Paul ever was.
That's what I mean. Whereas I would describe Rand Paul as more concretely libertarian. I would describe due to Nigel Farage not being completely pro free market, as you know, he's still pro NHS, and he's not. And also, he has like a less anti-statist view of the role of the state. are describing less as like libertarian or paleo-libertarian and more what I describe as conservatarian, where it's like where it's a mixture of like conservative and libertarian politics.
Because it makes them more electable that way, especially among the Republican base in the United States.
Yeah, so I would describe Nigel Farage as more conservatarian.
Okay, yeah. I mean, if there's for the 1860s though, Farage would be part of the Liberal Party though, and that's what a lot of people don't really realize, especially because Michael Malice, who said conservatism has always just been progressivism driving the speed limit. Like, for instance, you have hold on a second.
Yeah, I've had to mute Michael Malice because he's been particularly spicy with his monarchy takes the past.
Oh, absolutely, Michael Malice. But here's the thing. So you have John Stuart Mill, who famously said, conservatives are not necessarily stupid, but most stupid people are conservatives. You have a lot of people on the left who like to use that quote, like to describe like people in the Conservative Party, especially in the UK. Whereas the way things have shifted, at least to the left in terms of politics, John Stuart Mill would probably be a one-nation conservative today.
Yeah. Here's the thing. Like Gladstone would be considered to the right of the Conservative Party today, and he's like the most famous liberal the country has ever had, apart from perhaps Peel the Younger.
More than Winston Churchill or Margaret Thatcher?
Yeah. Well, I'm talking like in terms of like their party affiliation.
Oh, okay.
But even ideologically, he's probably on the same level as Churchill and Thatcher, at least among people who are politically aware. Churchill, but then again, Churchill is not really famous for his policy positions, and Thatcher's policy positions make her quite controversial in the modern day.
I remember she simultaneously had the most popular government and least popular government in UK history at the time.
Well, she had the most popular. She had one of the most popular governments in the 20th century at the time, but she has a much more. But she's looked back upon with quite a lot of scorn by a large portion of the population today, and a lot of that I think is manufactured.
The crazy thing is that you don't. So she was basically the UK equivalent of Ronald Reagan, but yet the crazy thing is in the United States, I mean, with the exception of the far left, you don't have very many Democrats who shit on Ronald Reagan. Like, you have a lot of Democrats today who really respect Ronald Reagan as a president. And I think one of the biggest reasons for that is the direction that Bill Clinton took the Democratic Party in back in the 90s, where he created the New Democratic Coalition, many of which consisted of former moderate Republicans who believed in essentially Reaganomics, because Bill Clinton was essentially a continuation of the Reagan administration. The only difference between Reagan and Bill Clinton, and mind you, Bill Clinton was actually more socially conservative than Ronald Reagan, but it was really just Bill Clinton expanded the welfare state, and that's really the only difference between the policies of Reagan and Clinton.
Well, that's the thing, though. It's the problem with like Tony Blair pretty much did the same here, but the difference is that Tony Blair kind of had to trick the Labour base into voting for it, because he kind of sold himself as just kind of like still going with the kind of the Labour line which they'd always went with, but just a more moderate version of it. It was only once he became Labour leader and became Prime Minister that he really showed his real hand, which was quite similar to Bill Clinton's. So it's Tony Blair in many ways had to trick the Labour base into voting for him, and he did that through a lot of kind of cultural optimism and kind of presenting like a new beginning for the country, Cool Britannia, things can only get.
Cool Britannia. I like.
Yeah.
I like that.
Well, that's literally what the era was called. The kind of late 90s sort of Britpop era of British pop culture. It was called Cool Britannia. It was like it's marked, and like his party political campaign was marked by the song. Everyone in Britain remembers the lyrics. Things can only get better. Like it's literally that sort of thing that ends up. It's literally that sort of thing that he used to kind of win himself into power, and that's why Tony Blair has kind of looked on. Kind of, again, a lot like Thatcher, is more of a mixed. He's kind of hated by Tory voters and is kind of seen as a mixed bag by Labour.
He's basically seen as like the cucked centrist.
He's basically just seen as Labour's Thatcher, really. The biggest thing that a lot of Labour voters don't like him for is getting us involved in Iraq post 9/11.
Yeah, that's fair.
I'd
say that like not necessarily domestically, with the exception of economics domestically, but not on social policy. But in terms of the role he played in UK politics, Tony Blair, I would compare more to George W. Bush as opposed to Bill Clinton. Because, I mean, essentially, Tony Blair on policy, very similar to someone like Christopher Hitchens.
What do you mean?
Foreign policy and sort of his social liberalism.
What? Well, yeah, he was... Christopher Hitchens, and he was kind of in that era, the same era. Steven Pinker. It's called the New Positivist movement, which is basically a movement, kind of a social movement based on sort of new age social liberalism, sort of late 90s, early 2000s social liberalism. Basically based in pushing the ideas of kind of secular new how do I describe this, sort of secular kind of progressive liberal values. And what they see as all the good coming from that, and and I would say Tony Blair was probably the political equivalent of that.
But what I feel like especially from like the more hard right in the UK, and I'm thinking of someone like our good friend Nima Parvini, who thinks Tony Blair was to blame for ruining everything. And mind you, Tony Blair, of course, valid criticisms, but I think blaming Tony Blair for ruining everything just seems a little far-fetched.
Well, you'll be surprised to know that that the good professor is actually simping for Tony Blair at the moment.
Wait, academic agent is simping for Tony Blair.
Yeah, look at his timeline.
I'll have to take a look a little bit. Wait, actually, yeah. So keep explaining, and I'll go find it.
You'll have to scroll down a bit to the point before it was announced that Her Majesty died. But the thing he was doing immediately before that was effectively simping for Tony Blair.
And what's his name again? Is it Shaw of something? I don't know.
It's OG. He's at OG Roland Rat.
OG Roland what?
Roland Rat.
Roland Rat. Oh,
he has a. He did at least have a picture of a rat plushie, which is Roland Rat, who's an 80s.
It looks like a rat plushie nailing the 95 Theses to a cathedral. I don't know if this is the correct one, but hold on. This one right here, is this him?
Yeah, that's him.
Okay, so what's he doing right now? How far down? Moving
Like-
address by the king. Oh.
Like, yes, I'm talking like 2 or 3 days ago.
Okay, yeah, he's been. Yeah, no, I'm not going to scroll all the way down there.
Oh, that's what I mean. He posts a lot, so
He does. He's chronically online, and
this is this, like I said, this is from before it was announced that this is from before it was announced that Her Majesty died. Like is one of AA is very much the right wing equivalent of current thing, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that like while he doesn't really do current affairs on his channel, he's very much current affairs oriented on his Twitter.
yeah, and mind you, I like AA, but I still prefer some of his older content. Like I guess his more like analytical video essays, his stuff on foreign policy and economics. But he was very much, and I don't mean he was never like socially progressive, but definitely his worldview was quote unquote lowercase progressive and things of like, oh yeah, like classical liberalism that will make us like all better and will like proceed. He used to have a very 19th century view of the world.
Yeah, and now he's a postmodern traditionalist.
Yeah.
He's
I'd say honestly, in some ways, that's the direction I'm going in. However, I'm never not going to be like against things like gay marriage or whatever. That it's like, okay, like there are like the only valid argument I would say against gay marriage would be the natural law argument, which is Aristotle's argument, which I do find completely logically valid. I don't necessarily agree, but I will at least acknowledge that particular argument, which a lot of people, specifically non-Christians and even Christians who are for gay marriage, don't understand that the reason that homosexuality is viewed in certain Christian denominations as a sin isn't because it's inherently evil, but because it supposedly goes against natural law. And I feel like that's something that like at least people need to be able to grasp their heads around. Like that was Aquinas's entire argument about it. It was 100% Aristotelian.
Yeah, it's it's this I describe myself as a paleo-libertarian, and I do describe myself as a traditionalist, but I've never 100% denoted myself to one train of thought, so I'm not 100% traditionalist.
No, yeah, I'm the same way. I think you're probably just a little bit to the right of you're a little bit to the right of me. But like at this point, and I don't like the whole labels left and right, but at this point where everything is going, reluctantly, I'm not afraid to say that I am more quote unquote on the right at this point. But like I would never use that as a particular descriptor.
Right.
But going back to the monarchy, let's talk a little bit about Elizabeth II's accomplishments. So, and I feel like people who are outside of the Commonwealth are not able to really comprehend how much she actually did. They just see her as a figurehead. But do you want to go into detail about the type of things she accomplished and why she was such a significant leader?
She was a significant leader because she was the leader that held the country together and kind of led us out of the colonial era and into I guess you could say the post-colonial era. She was a kind of a sign of traditionalist continuity in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Because and in many ways she was the only thing binding old Britain to new Britain, and that was kind of necessary because Britain was going through a radical change after the Second World War. It was the kind of change that Enoch Powell talked about in his writings, like how Britain had no concept of ethnic identity due to its imperial past and how it needed to develop one if it was to survive in any kind of significant fashion. And it was a lot like it was a lot of stuff like that, I suppose, that kind of made her uniquely it made her uniquely important in a way that really no other leader was. Furthermore, she was highly respected on the world stage, so this gave us a distinct advantage in terms of soft power, because it allowed us to it basically allowed, because she could influence decisions made geopolitically less through a how would I put it, less through a direct display of power, but merely through a whisper in an ear or a conversation over lunch with another world leader. That and that could only be achieved mainly because she was a monarch who was respected and was taken seriously. And it's a kind of, and I'm sorry, but what another weakness of democracy is that it's a respect that's only really achieved through hereditary leadership. That it's a respect that only really exists in a role that has existed in continuity for 1,000 years, and it's something that she represented. She was in many ways the living embodiment of the country.
Yeah, and I feel like that's something I guess maybe I don't understand a little bit. For instance, the anthem, I mean, of course it's not like you guys don't really have a single official anthem, but the main one has always been God Save the King / God Save the Queen. However, even though, again, I am in the context of the United Kingdom pro-monarchy, because it is a very important traditional institution, and it's like without the monarchy, the nation itself doesn't have a core solid identity. But even so, I still think that the anthem of the United Kingdom should be either Rule Britannia or Jerusalem.
God Save the Queen is our national anthem, mainly because again, it's a sign to show that the national anthem is it's a sign to show that again the monarchy is the binding factor for all Britons. And again, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Americans, but it's just not something that I'd expect people living in a republic to understand.
Yeah, no, I don't. I completely get what you're saying there. And the thing is, I never want to see an American monarch. I think the idea is absolutely disgusting to see an American monarch, because that's not what our tradition is. And again, it is solely about tradition in this case, in my argumentation. However, I think it would be completely out of character, and it would completely, I don't know, turn the culture on its head if they were to abolish the monarchy in the UK. It would be very similar. Oh, sorry about that. It would be very similar to what happened in Germany after they abolished the Kaiser, because in Germany, more or less, culturally speaking, everything's been out of whack ever since the abolishment of the Kaiser. So again, first starting with the Weimar Republic, which was a total failure. Then you saw the rise of you-know-who, and that was a failure too, to the umpteenth degree. And now you have the German Federation, which is just, I mean, and I say this as somebody who's a German on my father's side. I think it's really sad what Germany's become in a lot of regards. I don't hate Merkel. I think Merkel had very good intentions and sort of saw the error of her ways towards the end, a little bit too late, but realized you can't import as many migrants as she did. And again, I'm very pro-immigration when it comes to the U.S. Again, based on these very different standards that the U.S. has compared to the actual legitimate nations that exist in Europe. But again, I don't know. I think a good first step in Germany would be to restore the Kaiser, just like 1/3 of German youth believe.
Well, yeah, it's a cultural it's very much a cultural standard that, like, here's the ultimate thing about conservatism and why conservatism works. It's the fact that you don't necessarily have to understand why the one thing that liberals tend not to understand is, unless they're willing to engage properly with conservative politics.
Oh, by the way, read the private chat.
In conservative philosophy is the fact that liberals have this need to kind of understand everything, which conservatism really doesn't. Conservatism very much has a survivability bias in that you don't need to understand why something works to understand that it does work, and a belief that if something works, it should stay in place. And that's generally why overall I don't see any reason why conservatism should be done away with in any significant respect. But at the end of the day, what are we talking about here? We're talking about if it's pure politics, at least we're talking about policies and do they work or don't they? And if they do work, then conservatism is generally of the opinion that if something works, it should be kept. You don't need to understand something for it to work, whereas liberals are very insistent on understanding why something is the case. It's a very and this is where liberals and conservatives disagree, because the liberals are very much obsessed over, well, if something's not logically consistent, then it shouldn't be. Whereas conservatives are just like, I don't need my politics to be logically consistent. I just need it to work. And if something has proven itself to work over a long period of time, then we should keep it.
And that's what a lot of people, I feel like, on the left, who I think a lot of them are well-intentioned, but I feel like that's really the part of conservatism they can't understand. Like, the reason, it's not because they don't want change, it's because there is a very strong risk of, if you change things too radically, then the prosperity or the just the general stability of the country could completely collapse within moments. And that's exactly what Edmund Burke talked about in his writings, where he's not necessarily against changing things, but the things is, like, not everything can be so radically changed. Like, institutions need to be preserved for stability, but they can be altered if they adapt to certain conditions, but they can never not be completely abolished.
And this is ultimately why classical liberal and social liberalism are so different, because classical liberalism was very much a reformist ideology, whereas social liberalism, because here's the thing, classical liberalism, even before classical liberalism, there were two kind of, I guess you could call, forms of proto-liberalism, which were the English tradition. And
I think like Thomas Hobbes, yeah.
The English tradition and the French tradition. And while classical liberalism largely took on the values of English proto-liberalism, social liberalism was very much in the vein of, a lot like socialism really, was very much in the vein of French proto-liberalism, sort of Rousseauian philosophy.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Whereas sort of Hobbesian and Lockean philosophy, and indeed Burkean philosophy, were kind of the staples of English classical liberalism. And that's why English classical liberalism tends to be not completely so, but for the most part compatible with conservative politics.
And that's why you saw a lot of people in the Liberal Party, like a young Winston Churchill, jump ship from said party to the Tories, because the Tories it was like around the time of after World War I, the Tories developed a quote unquote liberal faction, which ultimately came to dominate the party. And the Conservative Party today in the UK are the descendants of not the traditionalist faction, but the liberal faction.
Yeah, and I guess you're right in that sense. Yes, it's very much like I said. Ultimately, conservative politics, and this is ultimately why I think liberalism ultimately needs to take. This is why liberalism is slowly losing favor in the West. It's because liberalism has basically it has bowed, it has bent the knee to I guess you could say, like, while it isn't the same as socialism, it is definitely bent the knee to the socialist framing, the socialist and French proto-liberal framing of the world. And and that is a framing of the world that is very much in direct opposition with reality. And this is causing liberalism as a whole, as an ideology, to lose favor.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, this is why both conservatism, libertarianism, classical liberalism, and reactionary politics are all, even to a much lesser degree, fascism are seeing an ascendancy in the modern day.
And you see a lot of people, especially on the left, who are talking about, oh, yeah, so many young people are becoming socialists. But are they really becoming committed socialists, or is it just a fad because it's the cool thing when you're like 16, 17? I've seen so many people who were on the left, like in high school or early college, who have become either libertarian, conservative, or even reactionary.
I'm of the belief that generally most people who are socialists in their late teens, early 20s, by their late 20s, early 30s, will likely end up just being establishment liberals. Like, not
That's
necessarily
with a good friend of mine who's been on the show, Strange Seconds, who calls himself a post-leftist at this point. Like, he grew up his parents were like a kind of like establishment center level liberals. But at this point, he says, you know what? Like, I'm out of college. I have a job now. I have like a pretty high position in my marketing firm. I'm making money. I don't want to be taxed super high. I hate the Republicans, but like, I could see myself in 10 years being like a Joe Manchin Democrat.
Yeah, it's that is generally my view. In my view is that most people who are socialists today will end up just becoming establishment liberals, because the philosophy behind establishment liberalism and socialism are really not that different. They both put emphasis, on egalitarianism, and they're both quite socially progressive. The economics is somewhat different, but not nearly as different as it used to be. Like I said, the reason why I'm not a fan of John Stuart Mill is because John Stuart Mill's introduction of utilitarianism into the liberal philosophy is what led to the classical liberal, social liberal divide.
Yeah.
So, I'm very much of the, like, thanks to that, the differences between like socialism and liberalism are much less than they were 200 years ago.
Yeah, the thing is, and I will always respect John Stuart Mill because he was the one who sort of, like, for the lack of a better term, red-pilled me, I guess. And I don't like that term, and especially for John Stuart Mill, it sounds kind of lame. But he was the one who really kind of like took me down the path towards where I am now, albeit over the course of about, I don't know, maybe like probably about 8 years at this point. I think I first read him in maybe 2014, 2015.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. John Stuart Mill is pretty much is pretty much what you could describe as he's the most famous liberal philosopher, but at the same time, he's also the person, whether directly or indirectly, responsible for liberalism becoming less liberal, which is kind of ironic.
But still, like, if he were alive today, he definitely would not be left wing. I mean, I'm still going to say that. I'm still going to give that to him.
Well, no, he wouldn't. But again, this is someone who basically, put it this way: this is just my perspective. It's not an objective analysis, but anyone who champions Jeremy Bentham is not a good philosopher in my view.
I'm not a fan of Bentham either. I 100% agree. I think I've read Bentham. Even Mill disagreed with Bentham. That's how much I used to consider myself 100% a utilitarian, but at this point, I've embraced virtue ethics over the past several years.
I've always leaned more into deontology as compared to utilitarianism.
Okay, I mean, for me, I would use utilitarian argumentation to justify deontological grounds, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I just think that utilitarianism and consequentialism, which is kind of a branch of utilitarianism, it's very much this.
I'd say the other way around. Utilitarianism is a branch of consequentialism, not the other way around. Did you say that? Never mind. You said that.
Yeah. What happened? Like, how should I put this? Like, its biggest flaw is that it, like you said, you're basing your belief in something based on the outcomes. But the thing is, you can never truly know the outcomes of something, and that's the point that deontologists make against utilitarians: is the fact that you're not able to predict those outcomes. You're not able to accurately predict outcomes because, while you can maybe predict the immediate outcomes, or like the outcomes or the secondary outcomes, or even maybe a few of the tertiary outcomes, the outcomes that branch off from that you have no way of predicting them, and this generally leads to very awful things occurring because people thought they were in control of the outcomes when they really weren't. And this is why things should only really be argued from ideas of like deontology and objective morality, because that at least even if I'm not saying it creates a perfect world, it doesn't. I'm not utopian, but it creates enough continuity that even if there are flaws, they are predictable and expected flaws, because it's always the same flaws.
Mm-hmm.
So in that way, deontology almost becomes more predictably consequentialist than consequentialism.
That makes sense, I'd say.
Because the flaws of your society, because you're generally going for the same positions, because you're basing it in the same morality over time, generally, like, the outcomes become more predictable because you're always doing the same thing, because you're always basing it on the same.
So let's move. Let's get back to the monarchy a little bit. So we talked about why Queen Elizabeth, why she was such an impactful ruler, but you also see people right now railing against her. This is especially the American left, who are saying, "Oh yeah, she made her family made her wealth off of imperialism, and she was a hardcore imperialist," which honestly doesn't make much sense to me, because she, under her, and I know officially the British Empire was dissolved, I think it was 1997, but the empire had effectively ceased to exist by around or after World War II, and she was the monarch who oversaw its functional dissolution.
Yeah,
people are referring to her as some kind of imperialist, because, like, I mean, if you have any basic understanding of history, you know that is not the case, and that she is still popular in the Commonwealth nations that were once under the sword of the British Empire.
She was the monarch who oversaw decolonization, and also the idea that the British monarchy made any money from the empire is patently false. Because the empire actually, like, literally every year of the British Empire's existence, it cost more to maintain than it brought in terms of wealth.
They literally, the empire literally became a net drain on Britain
On the
itself.
on the
And
British
they bankrupted themselves. And I'm not saying this is actually a very like morally righteous, virtuous thing to admire, but they bankrupted their empire in many ways, investing in programs and investing in fleets that would ultimately dedicate themselves 100% to leading the way for the global abolition of slavery.
Well, yes, and furthermore, it's also it's generally this like unsophisticated view of history, and furthermore, the modern monarchy it only makes its money off taxpayers, and furthermore, I love how people like British leftists call them parasites and like drains on society, when they're actually one of the most cost-effective like heads of state in the world. Like they do not have like I would love to see how much I'd love to see a leftist I would love to see a leftist read statistics on how much like the French Prime Minister and President and the President of the United States singularly like the French President and Prime Minister collectively and the American Prime Minister and the American President singularly like spend in terms of taxpayers' money like alone as compared to monarchy.
Let's take a couple minutes and take a look at a I read it this morning. Of course, it's from the Bozo Times, as I like to call it, or not the Bozo Times. Never mind, the New York Times. I was thinking of the Washington Post now. Mourn the Queen, not her empire. This title is like such a This is like Guardian tier right here.
It's a very cucked title. It's a groveling on your knees, like, please don't hate us. Please, we apologize. We apologize for everything. We're not bad people. Honest, just it's a complete like capitulation to another group of people's framing of the Queen and the country as a whole.
That's why I like to call the Guardian. I call it the Cuckchester Guardian. But yeah, so wait, hold on. So yeah, look how based she looks there. Like, not gonna lie. But yeah, so it says the end of an era will come as a refrain to commentators to access the record-setting reign of Elizabeth II. Blah blah blah. Individual institution. She had a different birthday for each role. 15th Prime Minister. Yeah, so yep, there she is with Philip. But yeah, so imperial patriotism, painting that as a bad thing. Royal tour of South Africa, my whole life, like, I don't know. And it's almost like they're trying to vilify the Commonwealth itself in this article, saying, oh, it's like this oppressive vestige of the imperial age, when the whole point of the Commonwealth was to be able to maintain that same relationship that the nations of the empire had, but without making one nation kind of above the other. Like, for instance, from an American perspective, if the British Empire were to reconstitute, 100% against the United States taking any part in it whatsoever, even though I'd support it as an ally. But I'm also, like, at the same time, so long as the Commonwealth of Nations exists, and so long as the United States would not recognize the royal family, like, as sort of the heads of that, like, personal heads, I am actually 100% open for the United States becoming an associate nation within the Commonwealth, because it is technically eligible because it was once part of the British Empire. and I feel like it would be the first step towards an Atlantic project.
Yeah, it's very much if the British Empire reconstituted today, it would very much it would likely be reconstituted mainly as the what's known as the Imperial Federation. The Imperial Federation was an idea proposed in 1902 as a means of preserving the empire while giving more representation to the individual sovereign states. And this basically would have had a federation parliament where each individual state would have their say over matters of the empire, with the mother country being the overall leading party in the superstructure, which is but yeah, it was basically seen as a way of keeping the empire together and being more fair while still ultimately maintaining the British Empire as a concept. So that's probably how it would be reconstituted as the Imperial Federation.
But if I would be for the United States becoming an associate member of the Commonwealth for cultural reasons.
It wouldn't be accepted for the same reason India doesn't want to be a part of it. It's one of those cases where it's a country that kind of broke away with less through diplomacy. Plus, the 13 colonies and the United States are technically two separate entities. So I get what you're saying, and I'm sure it would be considered, but I don't honestly think it would be accepted.
I feel like there'd be it wouldn't even be so much that the British wouldn't accept it. It would be more so that too many Americans would be against it for the sheer reason that they don't understand what the Commonwealth is.
Yeah.
But okay, let's go talk about the new king, Charles III. What is your take on him?
Charles III. I think he's very much a traditionalist, but he's a traditionalist. There's rumors that he's an Orthodox Christian, even though he's nominally an Anglican because he has to be. But in his personal life, he's a Orthodox Christian. There is
a very, very minor branch within Anglicanism, but there is something called Anglo-Orthodoxy, which is Anglicanism that embraces Eastern Orthodoxy, and traditionally it bases its many of its traditions going back to the Constantinians, who had a very strong connection with England. Like, you know how traditionally, King Arthur is I believe supposed to be the great grandson of Constantine the Great.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that tradition. That is fundamentally what I do believe Charles is as well, and what Philip was.
This is literally just being released. I've just sent you something relevant.
Okay. Yeah, I'll see if I can. Yep. Okay. Actually, that does bring me to kind of the next thing that I want to show, because it's not often talked about, but it's within a brief 4-minute video, actually, by a friend of mine who I collaborate with occasionally. We haven't done any live streams together, but we've done sort of video collaborations before. But hold on. Basically, a summary of what Prince Charles believes in his personal life. And again, this goes back to his traditionalism, and it goes back to the kind of books he reads and the personal philosophy that he follows, of which he has indicated, and there is actual evidence that suggests that this is more or less his deep underlying viewpoint. However, it's a little too fringe for a lot of people to accept, because some people view that it has been tainted by the far right, particularly in the 40s. But hold on a second. I'm just gonna. My friend won't mind if I show his video, but I think you'll find it interesting, especially. Hold on. Share screen. This is what Prince Charles or King Charles III believes fundamentally. This is like his deepest. This video basically explains what the core of his beliefs are, both religiously, culturally, and even politically, most likely. So, long story short, that is actually at the heart of King Charles's beliefs.
Indeed.
So I don't know if you know much about perennial traditionalism, but that includes thinkers such as René Guénon, Martin Lings, Friedrich Schuon, and most infamously Julius Evola.
Yeah, I've had how should I put this?
I mean, you're Protestant, so you probably have very, very, very mixed views on tradition.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
or against it.
I've had inklings of it. I've flirted with the philosophy. I've read some of it, but it would never struck me at all. Not really.
And I think that's probably again where you and I disagree. Again, like I'm lowercase Catholic, you are Protestant, and so and definitely traditionalism does appeal more to Catholics and Orthodox Christians more than it does most Protestant denominations. However, again, it is the only Protestants who really do embrace a lot of those ideas are the high church Anglo-Catholics, such as myself.
Indeed. So I'm more like, again, with my Protestantism, perennial traditionalism is never. I've very much been more of an ethnic / civic traditionalist as opposed to a perennial traditionalist. I'm more of the idea. I very much believe in. I guess you could say I'm more focused on the cultural differences rather than the cultural similarities between traditions.
So it depends for me. So I think that so more or less, I reconcile that by saying, okay, there is a common religious truth, more or less, that underlies like most religions. However, the reason that all of these religious traditions differ are because they express themselves differently outwardly, and that is fundamentally based upon the geography of where they are. So, for instance, Hinduism is the Indo-Aryan specifically the Indian, not necessarily Indo-Aryan, but expression and interpretation of that same primordial truth that goes all the way back to the ancient Aryans who began in the Caucasus. And that's why you can also see very similar religious beliefs between the ancient Greeks and the Indians.
Right. Well, that's what I mean, though. It's like perennial traditionalism focuses on cultural similarities, whereas I guess you'd say ethnic / cultural ethnic traditionalism is very much focuses on the exclusivities of a
I
singular.
definitely do think there are exclusivities, though, and I think most traditionalists do admit that. Like you see, like Julius Evola, for instance. Julius Evola, of course, as we know, disclaimer, was a fairly, I'll say, a racist individual. However, his form of racism was very different than the form of racism that was most prevalent during the early 20th century, the pro-genocidal, pro-eugenicist, biological, scientific form of racism. His racism was more like spiritually based. I still don't agree with his view on race, but it was a lot less problematic than, for instance, like the Nazis. Like, for instance, like he was like the kind of guy who was like, okay, all races are biologically equal, but he didn't think that they were spiritually equal. Which, I mean, by today's standards is racist, but by back then was kind of like, that's why a lot of the Nazis didn't like him, because they didn't like that people like Evola rejected biological hierarchy.
He also rejected German Aryanism. As
exactly.
He studied.
However, Himmler was a fan of Evola. However, I'm pretty sure that Evola met Himmler like once and thought he was like a fucking like weirdo, and Himmler was a weirdo. But either way, though, why do people? Like, is it true? Why do people dislike Prince Charles because like I hear a lot of people like shitting on him or thinking he's like some kind of like a bad person. However, honestly, I think that at least from what I know about Charles, he seems like just a very misunderstood, extremely awkward guy. Like he seems like a nice, polite, friendly guy who's just like very like shy and socially awkward. And this isn't to disparage him because I mean not online, but just in person. But I mean, personally, I wouldn't even be surprised if maybe he was on the spectrum. I'm not going to speculate, but he seems like I just feel like people give him too much shit.
Perhaps so. Again, I've only really flirted with perennial traditionalism, so I can't speak on this topic too deeply.
I'm not even talking about perennial traditionalism anymore. I'm just speaking of just him as a person in general, like his popularity. And I feel like I'm just like there seems to be some sort of cultural animosity against him, at least compared to someone like William.
Who are you talking about? Like
I'm talking about Prince Charles.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that absolutely is. But that's mainly to do with
Diana,
popular perceptions. But again, Diana was no saint herself.
No, I mean, they were okay. So here's kind of a hot take, I guess, and I guess the Americans in the audience who followed the royal family would probably disagree with me on this. I mean, so yes, King Charles, or formerly the Prince of Wales, as he was at the time, was unfaithful to Diana. However, at the same time, he was with Camilla long before he was with Diana, and his marriage to Diana was kind of forced on him. And Camilla, like Camilla was like the one who he loved, like truly. Like, yes, he respected Diana. He loved her in his own way. However, Camilla was the one who like he truly deeply loved.
Well, yes,
and so, and so it really goes back to it was no difference. Like the sort of the quote unquote affair he had with Camilla was really no different than you see with like medieval kings who had a concubine, but stayed in a marriage like of convenience. However, then we also need to remember Diana cheated on Charles too. It was just a shit show. It was just a marriage that was just kind of toxic from the beginning.
Yeah, it was never going to last. And to quote a line from The Crown, which is like sort of a dramatized version of the life of the Queen.
I just want to say, like up front, The Crown is a good show, but we need to remember it's fiction. It's fiction.
It's not very historically accurate.
Not at all. And I feel like a lot of Americans' perceptions, especially these days, of what the royal family is, comes from The Crown. And we need to be able to separate fiction from fact. We can enjoy The Crown as a well-produced, well-acted fictional show with good writing, but we need to like almost see it as like an alternate world.
Yeah, right. We don't need all the disclaimers. I'm literally just using a quote. It's just Charles is older than his years. Diana is younger than hers. So the age gap is less an age gap and more an age chasm. Yeah. Like that is effectively what it was like, because the age gap was considerable. I think he was like 10 years older than her. And then he was like 10 years older than her, and and again, like you said, like in terms of mentality, she was very immature while he was for her age, and he was very mature for his.
I do think she was fundamentally a good mother, though, and I will respect her for that.
She was, but she wasn't up for being royalty. She didn't have it in her to be royalty.
They were really pressured into the marriage too. Like,
well, yes, because they wanted him to marry someone who was suitable, because she's actually descended from the Stuarts, by the way.
But yeah, except the one. I mean, she's a Protestant though, so like that's kind of. I mean, that's besides the point. But
well,
I mean,
yeah,
doesn't that make that? Does Churchill's a distant cousin of hers, if I'm correct, right?
I'm not entirely sure, but I just know that on both sides of her family, she was descended from the Stuarts.
Okay.
One from an illegitimate line and one from a legitimate line.
Okay.
So she was they wanted someone who was acceptable, but she wasn't. But they wanted someone who was acceptable, and they also wanted to kind of squash his affection for Camilla, who was already married herself. And it just wasn't working, so they kind of pressured him into marrying anyone who was acceptable, and they chose Diana. And Diana she was up for it at first because, kind of the young woman's fantasy of marrying a prince, but then the reality became too much for her to bear very quickly.
She was 19. She was only 19, I remember.
Yeah, and she started having affairs rather quickly.
Didn't she? I mean, wasn't Charles? Didn't he stay faithful or cut it off with Camilla and stay faithful with Diana longer than Diana stayed faithful to him?
He was faithful up until the point when he found out she wasn't.
Yeah.
She she was how do I put this? She was they had 2 children together, and the marriage wasn't very good at all. Just didn't last.
Yeah, and I'm sure he doesn't. I'm sure he doesn't regret it, because I know he does love his children. But at the same time, it just was a very complicated situation. Like, he's basically always seen Camilla as his quote unquote wife, even when they weren't married.
Yeah.
Even though he tried with Diana.
Very true. Overall, I just think that it was never something that was going to work, and things turned out the way they were always going to turn out in the end, which is Charles and Camilla being together. And this is something that they should have really just allowed to happen to begin with in the 70s.
Yeah. And again, it all goes back to, and there has been a lot of intergenerational trauma within the royal family with regards to the marriages and the relationships and everything. And again, you saw it with Wallace Simpson and was it Edward? I think it was Edward, right? Or was it George? It was Edward, right? Who was with Wallace Simpson?
Yeah.
So yeah, Edward and Wallace Simpson. And then you saw it again, sort of to a lesser extent, with Diane and Charles. However, of course,
you also saw it with the Queen's sister and her husband.
But then you sort of then also with nowadays Harry and Meghan Markle. But do you think that, like, what do you think, like, the most just sort of like the biggest drama was? Do you think it was really with Edward and Wallace Simpson, or do you think it was between Charles and
it was absolute, like, in terms of like pop culture, it was Diana and Diana and Charles, but in terms of like actual real world significance and consequences, it was Wallace Simpson and King Edward, because King Edward was, of course, a Nazi sympathizer, as was Wallace Simpson.
I actually didn't know that.
Yeah, Wallace Simpson, and they were Nazi sympathizers. They were very close to Adolf Hitler. Yeah, as was Philip's sister. Philip's sister was, I think all of Philip's sisters were married to like high, like people in German aristocracy, and I think a couple of, not all of them were Nazis, but I think at least one of them was a member of the Nazi party, and all of them were kind of very, even just by association, were acquainted with Adolf Hitler. Philip, because he lived in the UK, was like the only one who wasn't.
Yeah, that's the case. But okay, but just I know we're probably going to go for another 10, 20 minutes or so, because I know you don't have too long. But what is let's start exploring Harry and Meghan Markle a little bit, because we now have, and this has been for a while, of course they're not going to inherit the throne, but it makes it complicated because you have two Americans who are now in the line of succession, well above most British people who are in the line of succession.
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
No, I want to talk a little about Harry and Meghan a little bit, because one thing that could be extremely controversial is the fact that because of them, there are now two Americans that are in line for the throne.
Well, here's the thing: I don't actually think their claim will ever be really respected.
I doubt it. I doubt it as well. But that doesn't change the fact that that is the case.
It's here's the thing. I do think that before long they will just be actively disinherited from the throne. Harry will be forced to give up any claim to the throne. Like, he'll be completely overshadowed in the name of the next in line after him and his children.
I say this semi-jokingly, and don't worry, I love the UK and everything, but I think it would be hilarious kind of if we cucked you and we just claimed Harry and Meghan and Harry became a US citizen.
Well, it wouldn't even be cucking, because I don't think anyone in the UK even really wants him anymore. They would rather he become a US citizen and just give up his claim to the throne. So then we would never actually have Harry or his children on the throne, ever. Like, zero chance.
And then it creates an American cadet house of the royal family.
Just even if it was just like American, even if they just became American citizens and just fine, just take them. We don't want them. Fuck off.
I mean, definitely, Harry definitely does have a more American sensibility than any of the royal family.
It's not very authentic. It's not. I don't think it is.
I think like Harry, at least he's kind of a tryhard in a sense, but he like wants to be. He's trying to put on that, and he has for years too. He has like homes in the U.S. and he has like even before he met Meghan.
See, I think this is a very American view of Harry. Like, Harry was very much up until he met Meghan, was a very much he was a lot like William, really. Like, him and William weren't that different up until he met Meghan. Like, the Harry that exists today is very, very different than who he was a few years ago. Like, he was a patriot, he served in the armed forces, he was very he took part in a lot of kind of traditional aristocracy. The only thing that really made him different was the fact that he was modern enough that he kind of worked as like the royalties, like kind of PR royal like for a few years, like modernizing like the perception of the monarchy by like trying to appeal to younger people with through like for the Queen, but that only really lasted for a couple of years up until he met Meghan. So this is a man who went through a controversy during his late teens, early 20s, where he went to a costume party dressed as a Nazi.
That was funny. Not gonna lie, that was kind of funny.
So I don't think saying that he has an American temperament is very honest. I think the American temperament is very put on, and it's very it exists solely so he can lay in the bed that he's made for himself.
Do you think he and Meghan are going to stay together?
No. As soon as I think he will get disinherited from the throne, and as soon as he does, she'll divorce him.
So if she divorced, but the crazy thing is, I think that she's going to divorce him, but I don't think he's going to. I can't see him going back to the UK with his tail between his legs. At that point, I just see him kind of like fading into obscurity, maybe meeting another American woman and just living out his days in like fucking Oregon or something.
At most, and I do actually. Here's the thing. I think you're looking at seeing the royal family as being a bit more vindictive than they actually are.
I don't think they're vindictive. I don't necessarily think they're vindictive. I just think, again, it is that strict adherence to tradition. I mean, I think they'll still love each other as a family, but he'll just never be able to be accepted in the British Eye again. Very similar to how Edward wasn't after marrying Wallace Simpson.
He won't be accepted in the British Eye, but I think he'll be allowed to live in the UK. I just think he'll be allowed to live in the UK, and he just won't take on royal duties. He'll basically just live on a family estate and just not come out in public very much.
So kind of like what happened to what's his name? Who's the pedophile prince again?
Andrew.
Yeah.
Basically that, but just less egregious. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
And also, now that the Queen is dead, Andrew's days are numbered. I don't think Charles will protect him. I think Charles will want to get rid of him as a means of kind of cleaning up shop for the royal family.
Was Charles and Andrew, were they even ever close as brothers?
Charles. Well, here's the thing: Andrew and who's Queen's 4 children.
I'm a daughter too. He was. I know Charles was close with his sisters.
I'm forgetting one of the names. Charles and Anne were born quite close together, and then Andrew and Edward were born quite close together, but the two pairs were born quite far apart.
Wait, Edward, is he still alive?
Prince Edward, pretty sure.
I don't hear much about him. I mean, I knew there was a Prince Edward, but I
probably the most obscure royal. He because he's the youngest. He's the least likely to inherit. He's pretty much just a minor British celebrity at this point.
Okay.
He still does royal duties, but they're like more niche royal duties that don't get much press coverage.
Like, honestly, if that were like me, if I were like let's say that were me or something, at that point, what I would do is I'd take advantage of that and I just kind of pursue a career that I wanted to. Like, yeah, I'd do royal duties, but like, I don't know, just maybe focus on like, okay, so like I'd have enough money to be able to live, but maybe just like write books or something under a pseudonym.
Yeah. Hold on. Does he have children? Pretty sure he does. I'm pretty sure he has daughters. Lady Louise Windsor and James. The Earl and Countess will have 2 children. Yeah, Lady Louise Windsor and James Viscount Severn, James Mountbatten Windsor, who's the Viscount of Severn.
Okay. Well, what do you think about this for a movie idea? I was talking with some people just on Discord last night, and somebody suggested this. I thought it was the funniest thing ever. Get this. King Charles plants a bomb beneath Buckingham Palace and threatens to blow it up if Parliament doesn't pay him $1 million.
That sounds silly.
Exactly. That would be the dumbest thing ever. That was the whole joke, but no. But either way, I guess we'll start to wrap things up because I know you're a little tired. You got to go eat, and I forget if you said you had something tonight, but either way. Oh shit. Brian Boru, Harry and Meghan become king and queen if Putin nukes Buckingham Palace. That's not wrong.
Again, even then, I just think that the parliamentary superstructure wouldn't allow that to happen. They'll just find someone else. There's obviously not all of them live in Buckingham Palace.
No. I mean, I mean, some are at. I mean, there's Windsor Castle too, and then there's a bunch of other estates. And I think Balmoral is only the summer home, right?
Yeah, and they own, each individual royal owns a bunch of like property individually. So a lot, like I think like a lot of the more niche royals just have private property in like the nicer parts of London that they live in, where they're not doing royal duties, and that's where their kids live and stuff like that.
Probably just blending in.
Yeah. Well, they would blend in with the upper middle and the high class. They're not blending in with the plebs, but
Oh
they
no.
they basically just blend in with the UK celebrity scene.
Yeah, makes sense. But yeah. So anyway, just to wrap up, do you have any final thoughts on this specifically? What you think that the future of the monarchy is? What King Charles's reign is going to look like? I don't know the strained relationship between um, uh, um, Hergel Markle, or I don't know, whatever, Harry and Meghan, as well as um, Prince William. I don't know, just in general, just give your extensive final thoughts just on this entire subject.
Well, I think Charles has his work cut out for him for living up to Elizabeth's legacy. I think he will rise to the challenge. I don't think he'll ever be quite as popular, but I think he can be popular enough. I don't think the abolish the monarchy movement is ever going to gain any real steam. I think overall, I think his reign will be just another quiet one. I would hope that he would be willing to become a bit more partisan in politics, but I don't ever see it happening. So that's more wishful thinking on my part. But overall, I think his reign will just be a lot. I guess you could say a continuation of Queen Elizabeth's, and here's the thing: he's an old man already, so his reign will be considerably shorter. It's very likely, but by the time me and you are in middle age, William will be king of the United Kingdom.
How old's William now? He's like what, 38, 39?
Hold on, Prince William. He is 40.
Oh, okay. So he's getting up there too. He's like almost middle age.
Yeah, he was born in 82.
Oh.
I believe Charles is 72.
No, I think he's 76. No, 73. 73.
73, yeah, 73. Just to give you the kind of what I mean by the age difference between the Queen's children, he was born in 48, where he was born in 1948, whereas Prince Edward the youngest was born in 1964.
There's a pretty big difference.
Yeah.
And how old was, so that means Elizabeth was what, 22 when she gave birth to Charles, right? Would have been 22. No. 20.
Yeah.
23.
Yeah, she would have been 22 because she was born in 1926.
Okay.
So she would have been 22, and she would have been
38.
30. She would have been 38 when she gave birth to Edward. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry. Finish with whatever final thoughts you had.
Well, that's about it, really. Just I think this reign will be more of a continuation of Queen Elizabeth's reign. I don't think we're going to get any kind of real, shall we say, we're not going to get any kind of daring monarchical rule until kind of the rule of Queen Elizabeth has faded somewhat from public consciousness. So we're looking more at the reign of King George, which is William's eldest.
And we're going to be old men then.
Yeah, it will be before we get any kind of daring, kind of more partisan monarchy we're more looking at at the earliest King George. King William might, but I highly doubt it.
Yeah. Well, on that note, thank you for coming on Paleo-Angloism. I'm going to like to have you on a little longer, but I know you have things to do and it's getting a little late there. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you for coming on.
Yeah, it's absolutely fine. Thanks for having me.
And on that note, again, everybody, I'm not a monarchist, but out of respect, I have one thing last to say. And that is the queen is dead. Long live the king.